Hi everybody, welcome back. I wanted to talk a little bit about the membrane potential because that seemed to cause some confusion on the AVQ. So I drew a circle here to represent our neuron. We all know that's not what a neuron really looks like, but for now it's easier to draw. And we know that the inside of the neuron is slightly negatively charged and the outside of the neuron is slightly positively charged, and this is because all the DNA and proteins are inside. We also know that there's a lot of sodium ions, positively charged sodium ions, outside the cell and very little inside the cell. But we do have potassium ions inside the cell and very little potassium ions outside the cell. So we have two gradients here. We have a sodium gradient, and if we were to open channels in the membrane and allow sodium to move across the membrane, it would move into the cell. The reason that the sodium can't do that normally without a channel is because it is charged. Remember, charged particles or ions can't cross the plasma membrane by themselves. They need to use facilitated diffusion that has a channel or carrier protein. And likewise, if we were to open up potassium channels, potassium would leave. Okay, so when we talk about membrane potential, all membrane potential is a difference in charge between the inside and the outside of the cell. So if the inside and the outside of the cell were the same, the membrane potential would be 0. But in a resting neuron, a human neuron, it is not the same. So resting membrane potential in a human neuron is negative 70 millivolts. All right, so a lot of people in the question where it asks, if I were to open sodium gates and allow sodium to come into the cell, would the membrane potential get bigger or smaller? A lot of people wrote bigger. So let's talk about this. Think of the membrane potential like a number line. So remember, we have negative numbers here. So negative 70 is way down here to the left, and positive numbers are up here towards the right. So these are positive charged, this is negative charged. So we're sitting down here at negative 70. This is 0. So 0 is where there's no difference between the inside and the outside. And we clearly don't have that situation here because I've already told you the inside is more negative and the outside is more positive. And the difference between them at rest is negative 70 millivolts. So what happens if we add a bunch of positive charges to the inside of the cell? So that is adding positives to this area. Sodium's coming in and we're adding positives. So we're actually making it less negative. We are changing it so this 70 millivolt difference between the inside and the outside might be less. It might be moving to maybe negative 68 or maybe negative 65. Right? So the more sodium we add to this, the closer to 0 these two become. Because instead of maintaining this difference of positive to negative, we're making the inside less negative. So we're actually going to be making the membrane potential smaller. We're making it less negative. And remember, back in chemistry, we talked about polar. Things that were polar are things that are different. So I want you to use that polar and that definition of things that are different here. If the membrane potential is the difference in charge, they're different, so they're polar. If you reduce that membrane potential, if you make them less different, you are depolarizing the membrane potential. So adding sodium ions is going to depolarize this cell. Now, if it gets all the way to threshold, which is negative 55 millivolts, it's actually going to trigger that cell to send an action potential. And that's the subject for another video. But if we depolarize to negative 55, we have made the inside and outside differences smaller. Likewise, if we allow potassium to leave the cell, we are taking away positive charges from the inside, and we're putting them outside. We're making the outside more positive, and we're making the inside more negative. That's going to go the other direction now, right? Instead of at negative 70, we might go to negative 80, negative 90 even, because we're making it more negative in here. And so the difference from here to here is getting bigger. So when we go more negative, when we allow positive ions to leave, we are allowing our membrane potential to get bigger. This is called, depending on where we are, either repolarization or hyperpolarizing. And it's hyperpolarizing when we go past normal resting membrane potential. So over here, we might hyperpolarize the cell. If we're just coming back from like negative 65 back to 70, that's just repolarizing. Now later on in an action potential, this membrane potential is going to get all the way up to plus 30. So we're going to depolarize all the way up to plus 30. Get another color here. Depolarize all the way up to plus 30, and then we're going to turn around and we're going to repolarize all the way back down to 70, negative 70, and then even past, which is hyperpolarizing. So just to test you a little bit, I want you to think about this for a second. What if I told you we also have chloride ion? Let's see, what color should I use? How about dark green? We also have chloride ion outside the cell. What if I opened chloride channels and allowed chloride to come inside the cell? What do you think? Would that depolarize or repolarize the cell or hyperpolarize the cell? If you add negative charges to the inside of the cell, we're making it more negative. We are making that membrane potential bigger. We're going this way. And in fact, if the cell is at negative 70 at rest, and you add a bunch of chloride charges to it, it's going to hyperpolarize this cell. It's going to take it further away from being the same on both sides. Further away also from our magic negative 55 threshold. So a chloride ion is going to be an inhibitory ion. If you have a neurotransmitter that opens chloride channels, it's actually going to stop this cell from moving towards threshold and sending an action potential. The key thing to think about is that polar means different. If you're making something less different, you are depolarizing. If you're making something more different, if you're increasing that membrane potential, you are repolarizing. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.